Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. The bridge was already half full by the time I made it onto the incline. Eastbound lanes packed, as usual, steel and glass stretched out in front of me like a frozen river of routine. I was in the middle lane, crawling along with everyone else headed into the city, boxed in by a box truck on my left and a black Escalade ahead of me that hadn't budged in minutes. Talk radio buzzed low on the dash, something about traffic cams near the Lincoln Tunnel, and then a vague note about unrest downtown. I barely caught it. My focus was on the rhythm of brake lights pulsing red across the bridge deck, trying to time when I'd need to inch forward again. I hadn't even finished my coffee. Up ahead, two seagulls rode the wind between the cables, dipping into the gaps between towers like they had somewhere better to be. The Hudson, slate grey and slow this morning, moved without urgency. The kind of day where nothing demands attention, clear skies, clean light, no hint that anything's wrong. Somewhere behind me, a horn blared, one long, frustrated note, and a second followed, impatient but useless. Nobody moved. A cyclist zipped past on the pedestrian path to my right, head down, music leaking from earbuds. I watched him until he disappeared behind a beam. The host on the radio switched gears, now talking sports, something about last night's Mets game. I reached to change the station, then stopped. My phone buzzed once in the center console, a news alert, but I didn't check it. Just another thing. Probably weather, or politics, or some new flu in some other country. I remember shifting in my seat, loosening my tie, glancing at the clock. It was just past 8. Ordinary day, another normal day. I live in Jersey City, Journal Square side. I am 29, the sort of office worker who spends his day contending with numbers that do not have faces. Tuesday is usually a meeting with a client in Midtown. I had a shirt ironed last night, a tie folded in the glove box just in case. My mother used to tell me to carry an extra granola bar and a phone charger because the world breaks at the most boring times. I had both, which felt like proof against small disasters. The host circled back. "Unrest downtown," he said, then something about a march that cut east near Foley Square and police staging by the courthouses. The words sounded washed, like a tide had run through them. Not a crisis, just the usual frictions that make live TV interesting. I took another sip, scrolled for a different station, landed on talk radio arguing about whether a flu season starting early was because of air travel or air conditioning. A CDC official's name slipped past me. I yawned, blinked grit out of my eyes, and eased forward one car length as the line let us pretend we were moving. Halfway up the western approach, everything knotted. Not a brake tap, not a slowdown, a lock. Red taillights turned into a wall. The truck to my right settled on its springs. A horn stuttered somewhere behind, then another, then a chorus with no rhythm. I raised the radio volume because quiet always makes stuck feel worse. On the Manhattan side, a helicopter swung south over Washington Heights, then another cut north lower, rotor wash flickering through high-tension lines. Sirens lived in the distance, thready but constant, the way a city breathes under the obvious. A voice cracked from a loudspeaker. "All drivers remain in your vehicles. Remain in your vehicles." It came from up ahead, bounced off cable and steel, flattened by wind into something older than the speaker holding it. Engines idled. A man in a white van 2 cars back climbed up on his seat and peered forward through his windshield like height would pierce traffic. The woman in the blue Subaru behind me leaned out, phone in hand, eyes trained toward the towers. On my screen, a push alert blinked alive. Breaking, CDC investigating new neurological flu. I thumbed it open, skimmed 3 lines about clusters and observation, and put the phone down because the words looked like weather. We waited. I texted my manager out of reflex. Traffic jam at GWB, running late. 3 dots came and went. The loudspeaker repeated itself, sharper, closer. The helicopter on our side drifted outward over the river, then curved back with a view down our lanes. The sky held that thin, high-fall clarity that makes objects look too close. Somewhere far forward, a car door slammed hard enough to sound wrong, like a dropped sheet of steel. Another siren took on a higher pitch, then cut off mid-wail. 30 minutes folded up without moving 100 feet. A bus on the upper level, 3 or 4 vehicles ahead of me, shuddered. It rocked once, then again, heavier. Faces in the bus windows crowded, pale ovals pressed into glass. Someone was pounding, the kind of pounding that changes shape when it meets metal. Sound travels strange on the bridge. The beat came through as if the bus was a drum. A scream cut through the gaps between horns, a thin thread that unwound everything else. On the left lane, an officer in a Port Authority windbreaker jogged forward, hand up, other hand on his radio. The loudspeaker boomed again, then stuttered to silence like someone had let go of the talk button too soon. The bus thrashed. A pane spiderwebbed and popped out like a tooth. Someone inside fell into that hole and caught the frame for a second, then dropped to the asphalt hard enough to leave a smear that was more grime than anything else. He stood with a rip in his sleeve and something dark on his temple and ran. He didn't look back at all. He did not move like a commuter. He moved like a fire had a shape and he knew it could catch him. More shapes crowded the broken window. The door half opened, jammed, then bucked outward as someone kicked it. The rocking got worse. It felt contagious, the way the whole span took on the bus's rhythm. The officer drew his sidearm and held it pointed at the pavement, voice thin on the wind. 2 more officers hustled in behind him, one with a shotgun, one with a less lethal launcher I recognized from news footage. Orange canister clipped to his vest. A cough of smoke popped beyond them, then rolled low under the wind like fog. When the first of the people from the bus hit the asphalt on our side, he went to his knees, and then popped up with a twist that made no sense for a man who had just fallen. He grabbed a man climbing onto the divider and dragged him down with a clean, practiced grip that police learn, and I do not. The 2 of them thrashed at the railing, feet skidding on dust. The officer with the shotgun shouted for hands, for space, for everyone to back up. The loudspeaker came alive for a fragment and died. Someone's horn jammed open and brayed without pause. I locked my doors. It was pointless theater in a parking lot made of steel and panic, but my thumb did it anyway. I watched the scene ahead through my windshield, and my own reflection moved on the glass like a ghost sitting in my seat. The woman in the blue Subaru cracked her window and asked me, without looking at me, what I saw. I said I didn't know. Then I said bus trouble. Then I said officers. My voice sounded like it belonged to a person watching a storm at sea from behind a hotel window. Gunshots took the air and folded it. 3 quick cracks that felt too small against the bridge's bulk. A man on the divider tumbled. The bus doors flew open enough for a foot to wedge. People inside tried to squeeze through at the same time and jammed themselves into a wedge of elbows and bags. Someone in the squeeze bit at someone's forearm. Not like a movie, not a theatrical chomp. It looked like someone trying to hold onto something with teeth because hands weren't working. The person on the receiving end screamed a sentence that didn't have any words in it. The smell changed. Hot blinker plastic, brake dust, and now something acidic, like vinegar and pennies, rolling forward with the wind and the smoke. The helicopter lowered, did a slow pivot, then climbed out toward mid-span, as if the pilot had been told not to hover over anything that moved too much. A second bus further back started to thrash to the same beat. Radios crackled in a chorus nobody could understand. The line broke. It did not break in a way that let us go. It broke into pieces of people. Doors flew open like mouths, bags tumbled, coffee cups spilled, and the walkway rail along the edge rattled as the first wave of the stampede bounced into it. A father yanked a toddler seat free and stuck it under his arm like a football. A man in an orange hoodie tried to climb the metal side rail and realized the fence and its overhangs were designed to be climbed only by maintenance, not by someone in a hurry. He hung there in indecision, then dropped back into the stream and ran. My door opened because a hand pulled it. I had not unlocked it. A teen with a backpack tried to climb past me into my car, eyes blank with a single idea that my interior was safer than the air. I raised both hands and said, "Keep moving, keep moving," and he blinked and stumbled on. A woman tugged at my handle next and cursed that it was locked, then moved past with a purse clutched hard enough to shape her knuckles. I unlocked and stepped out because staying inside felt like waiting for the bridge to decide for me. The air was full of instructions. Officers yelling to move back. Some man yelling to go forward. People yelling for a child by name. My name is Daniel. I did not say it out loud. I slung my backpack and checked for my wallet and phone by habit. The Subaru woman behind me stepped out with a girl no more than 6 holding her sleeve. The girl held a pink water bottle. Her mother's eyes were doing the fast scan of a person who has already mapped 3 possible routes and liked none of them. Stay close, I told the mother because saying something felt like adding structure. She nodded once, a quick, efficient acknowledgement that filed me in her mind as a human, not an obstacle. A man stepped out of a red Freightliner on our right, boots heavy, jaw set. He pulled a tire iron from behind his seat and tested the weight like it belonged to him. He was mid-40s, beard grey at the edges, eyes steady. He looked like someone who would cut a seatbelt at a crash without asking permission. Name's Ruben, he said, like that would keep us from turning into echoes. Nora, that was the mother's name, I would learn. Her daughter was Ava. But in that minute, names were background. The bus disgorged shapes onto the pavement. Some ran, some moved wrong, fast in segments and slow in corners, like joints were locked and muscles were wired to a new pattern. One of those shapes hit the side of a sedan hard enough to dent a door, then peeled off and hit the next car, and the next, moving in a jittering line that made my eyes want to skip ahead. I tried to aim my steps toward the Manhattan end, because a city has services, and services meant something. The checkpoint up ahead was a tangle of flashing lights and uniforms. We got 20 yards, and met resistance made of people. A wall of those fleeing met a rip current of those trying to help loved ones reach us from the bus. The officers at the checkpoint fell into a formation I had seen at parades and protests, but their faces were wrong for parades. A tear gas canister arced and bounced, hissing. The smoke widened low to the ground, spreading panic the way water rear-ends a sandcastle. People choked, stumbled, reached blindly for strangers. Ruben pushed us toward the shoulder, then toward the pedestrian side, because the roadway had become a horizontal pit. Up, he said, pointing at the fence and the maintenance gate set into it near the tower. The gate was meant for orange vests and keys, not for commuters. A chain ran through its links. Behind it, the walkway narrowed, wrapped in chain link with flanges bent outward. 2 men were already at the gate, pulling. The chain jangled. The lock held. Move, Ruben said, and set the tire iron into the gap where the lock met the chain. He braced his boots, leaned, and popped once. Metal held. He shifted grip, changed angle, and put shoulder and leg into it. The chain jumped. The lock screamed. The second pop was a sound I felt more than heard. The gate swung 6 inches and jammed on a bent hinge. He kicked the bottom corner, and it moved enough for a person to slip through sideways with a scrape. He did not smile. He did not say anything heroic. He just made space in a world that was suddenly short on space. Through, he said to Nora, and lifted the chain link up a fraction with the iron so her daughter could duck under without catching hair or clothes. Ava made a sound like a bird, quick and breathy, and slipped through. Nora followed, then me. Ruben came last and pulled the gate mostly shut, then ran the broken chain through out of habit, as if tidiness mattered to the bridge itself. The walkway vibrated with footsteps. It is narrow, and the chain link on either side makes it feel narrower. The river threw sunlight up into our faces. The tower rose like a blunt knife ahead. Below us, the lower level crawled the same way but with more horns, a deeper sound that made me think of ships. To our left, the city ran along its cliffs, windows flashing, the sky too blue to justify panic. To our right, New Jersey sat with its own quiet, the Palisades shouldering the water with stone that looked unconcerned with human choices. We moved. The bridge moved. For decades, I had driven it without noticing that it flexes and hums and sings. On foot, you feel the life in its bones. People pressed past in both directions. Indecision turned into motion. A cyclist in a neon jacket tried to ride through the crowd and had to pick up his bike like a suitcase. A woman tripped on a gap in the planks and scraped her palms. She stood with her hands out, shaking, looking at her own skin the way you look at a new shirt that you liked and now has a stain. Behind us, the noise rose in a way that told me the infected had found the gate. The chain link sang under repeated hits, a metal song that set my teeth on edge. I glanced back and saw hands through the gaps, fingers raw, knuckles white. One of the figures slammed the gate with a shoulder and bounced off, then slammed again without changing expression. Another slipped through the gap sideways, scraping. Ruben moved like he was at a loading dock. He set the tire iron under the hinge to jam it a second, and bought us time that felt like found money. We reached the first tower, and everything slowed again, because the walkway narrowed even more around the base. People bottlenecked there, eyes wide, mouths open not with screams, but with the breaths that come after. Above us, the lighting conduit rattled. A helicopter dragged a rope of air down, and the chain link chattered. On the roadway, a cruiser clipped a fuel truck at an angle nobody plans for. Metal screamed and folded. The truck slewed, hit the barrier, and stopped wrong. The cruiser spun in a way that made onlookers gasp, not because of gore, but because it looked like a coin that finally lost its spin. Silence lasted a half-second. Then, an officer ran toward the wreck waving arms. Someone shouted to clear the lane. The air took on a sharpness I couldn't name. The truck's driver climbed out with a hand to his forehead and tried to stand his ground like he could will the situation back into physics he recognized. He pointed at something on the ground I could not see. He raised both hands to signal okay. He did not look okay. "Move," Ruben said again, a steady beat in a song that wanted to devolve into noise. He put his free hand on my shoulder and steered with the kind of pressure that does not invite argument. Nora kept Ava's hand tight, knuckles white, breath quiet. She leaned close and used the tone mothers use for fire drills. "Eyes on me, kiddo. Count steps. 10 at a time. Ready? 1. Ava counted. The numbers gave shape to motion. 10 steps. Then 10 more. We reached a section where the chain link had a maintenance panel with a rusted hasp. On the other side, a catwalk ran along the tower's interior, bracing, narrower and less crowded than the public path. Ruben looked at it, then at the panel, then back. He raised the tire iron again, and I saw the calculation in his face. Breaking things is easy. Breaking the right thing takes memory. He placed the iron under the hasp and popped. The panel swung open like a mouth. He motioned us in. Inside the tower, it was all steel geometry and wind. The noise from the roadway dropped to a thud and a whine. The catwalk had a gate at the far end, leading back to the public path near mid-span. It was not a direct escape. It was a detour around a clogged artery. It was enough. We moved single file. The catwalk's grating printed its pattern into my soles. I kept my left hand on the rail because the height had stopped being scenic and become a fact that could not be ignored. A man in a suit squeezed past going the other way, hair perfect, tie perfect. His eyes did not match the rest. He asked if he could get through. He said he had to get back to New Jersey. He said he had a meeting. He said the same sentence twice, then again. Words can be a shield and a rut. Ruben put a hand up, gentle, and said, "Not this way, friend." The man nodded as if he had been given a pronouncement and turned back. We rejoined the walkway at a break in the bottleneck. Manhattan drew nearer, but the checkpoint ahead had become a noise machine. Police lines dissolved into knots. The plume of tear gas had lost formation and drifted downwind to our side. People coughed, faces turned red-eyed and streaming. An officer with a megaphone tried to herd the flow into lanes that did not exist anymore. Another officer fired warning shots into asphalt and hit a radiator, geysering steam. The walking dead came up through gaps that panic had made in the formation. I saw the first one hesitate at the lip of the walkway, like a person at a pool deciding if water is cold. He looked around, head moving in short mechanical cuts, and then he moved forward as if his mind had been convinced by a math problem nobody else could see. He used his elbows like tools. His mouth opened and closed. His steps were sure until they were not. He tripped on a bag strap and went down and rose again so fast the trip felt like an edit cut wrong. He found a person with focus. That person backed into the fence and held hands up and described circles in the air, and then went silent into motion. The crush sent someone against the panel of chain link so hard that the panel bowed out. The sound of 100 feet on the grating is a kind of rain. Reuben said we had to get higher, which on a bridge is not an intuitive sentence, but he meant the crossbeam ladder that climbs 3 rungs to a maintenance ledge. He boosted Ava with a steady push. Nora climbed after without a complaint, legs shaking in small contained arcs. I followed, hands more slippery than they should have been. Reuben came last, then pulled the ladder up and laid it on the ledge as if that would matter to the next person deciding to climb. It mattered. A woman below looked up, weighed the climb, saw no ladder, and turned west instead. The sound changed again. It deepened and widened, and then thumped, as if a giant hand had patted the bridge's back. Heat rolled across us, dry and hard, not yet a flame but a warning. I looked left. The fuel truck had finally given up its argument with physics. Fire found something that helped it do what it wanted. The first bloom rose yellow-white, and then threw black the way thunderheads throw shadow. The flames did not reach us, but the waves of heat did. The bridge shook, not from structural fear, but from the shared reaction of thousands of muscles compressing at once. "Back that way will cook us," Reuben said. He pointed forward with the iron. "We go east and get off. Whatever happens after that happens off this span." The sentence was not comforting, but it was a plan. Plans are a kind of oxygen. We used it. We moved along the maintenance ledge, a narrow shoulder of steel that ran behind the chain link. The infected below threw themselves into the fence because bodies follow bodies. A man we had passed earlier reached for me through the mesh with fingers that were more hand than intention. I handed him my water bottle because he looked like a person who had swallowed smoke. He took a sip that shook and handed it back without looking at my eyes. He said thank you to the air. That sentence made more sense than almost anything else around us. Ava slipped and skinned a knee and did not cry. She drew a breath in, counted 4, and let it out slow because her mother had taught her that. Nora nodded and said, "Good, keep counting," and kissed the top of her head without stopping. Small rituals held the world together by threads. You take them for granted until you see them tie something heavy. We were near midspan when the infected found the gate Reuben had broken and came through in numbers. The sound of chain link flexing became a roar. I looked back and saw a wave of motion on the walkway, not uniform, just a series of surges where the wrong energy had taken hold. People shoved without malice, others froze and became obstacles. The infected used the gaps the way water uses a sluice gate. Reuben turned, stepped down off the ledge to the walkway proper, and lifted the tire iron like a flag not to wave, but to mark a line where his will was. "Go," he told us, and took a half step toward the first figure who came at him. He did not swing wildly. He used the iron the way a pro swings a narrow tool in a tight space. A quick snap to the wrist, a shove to the shoulder. The infected stumbled and hit the fence. Another came, and he did the same. I dropped down beside him because there was no argument that considered leaving him. Nora hesitated, because shielding her daughter under a ledge felt right, but abandoning one of us to make space for that shield felt wrong. She set Ava behind her and stepped down too, with her hands up in the shape of a person who has decided that, if nothing else, she will slow a problem before it reaches her child. We did not form a wall, we formed a hinge. We edged, giving ground an inch at a time. The infected did not speak. Some of them made a noise like a person trying to exhale a word that would not come. Others were silent and efficient, eyes locked on the closest person who moved. I used my backpack like a shield. It thumped into ribs and arms. Someone, not infected, grabbed my belt to steady themselves, and I stayed upright because if I went down the space I occupied, would become a hole that would not stay empty. An older man fell at my feet, glasses cracked, breath choppy. I reached for him, then realized he had a hand still hooked in his daughter's sleeve, and that she was 8 or 9 and skidding toward the fence with him. I pulled on the sleeve and got her up because small humans should not be on the floor of a moving crowd. He mouthed gratitude and turned west with his girl tucked behind like a shadow. The wave hit us harder. A shoulder rammed me. I slid. Reuben caught my jacket and pulled me back into a place his presence had made safe for a second. He took a hit meant for me and did not make noise about it. He shoved the hitter into the mesh. The mesh gave, the mesh held. "Move," he said to me again, not looking away from what was in front of him. "Get them across, now." I turned to Nora and Ava and nodded east. The city had sharpened. Smoke had begun to peel up from a half-dozen points in Washington Heights and Harlem, as if someone had decided fires should exist in rows. A helicopter banked south with a limp rope trailing, as if it had dropped something it had meant to keep. Sirens converged and dispersed, and sometimes blared at each other when two engines met in an intersection where rules had broken before anybody announced it. We edged east with the ledge as our margin. The infected pressed in behind us. The crowd made small pockets where compassion lived and died in seconds. A man tried to lift his wife over the rail and thought better of it when he understood where the drop went. A teen shoved past and then stopped to help a falling stranger, because he had seen himself in that fall 2 minutes earlier. A woman held a tiny dog and apologized to it for the world out loud. The dog licked her chin and did not know anything except her smell. Behind, Reuben stalled 2 more surges and then lost ground because there is only so much space one person can give away before physics stops being a gentleman. A man in a security uniform tried to stand with him and got swept sideways. Reuben caught his sleeve, yanked him behind, and kept his feet. He was not a hero in the way movies sell. He was a set of decisions that were better than mine would have been in the same minute. The maintenance gate at the second tower stuck on warped metal, and I had to jam my shoulder into it until my teeth hurt. It popped, and sang, and swung an inch. Nora took the top corner, and lifted with a sound that was all muscle. The gate opened enough. Ava ducked through, then Nora. I went last and held it while 2 other people I would never meet again squeezed in, because leaving a small kindness on the table felt like theft. Reuben had not followed. He stood 5 paces back, tire iron low, jaw clenched, watching an infected man in a torn shirt test distance. The man lunged short, then long. Reuben stepped in, planted the iron's tip against the sternum, and pushed. The man folded and pinned another behind him. It bought a single breath of time. 3 more surged. Reuben looked at me over their shoulders and made a small nod. Nothing grand. A thank you for the opportunity to choose. I set my weight on the gate. It moved inches. "Reuben!" I called. He did not answer with a word. He ran. He ran a short, ugly sprint through resistant bodies and slid sideways through the gap at the last possible heartbeat, tire iron scraping my arm, his boots catching and finding. He slammed his shoulder into the metal with me, and we shut the gate enough to make it a problem for whoever came next. He staggered, braced a hand on the fence, and grinned in a way that did not reach his eyes. "Go," he said hoarse. "No speeches." We crossed the second tower's shadow. The fire behind had found friends. The heat on the wind had become intermittent, a pulse instead of a sheet. A siren on the lower level rose and fell, and then cut short. The sound of amplified commands from the Manhattan end turned into static. I smelled the river harder now, brine and diesel and something metallic. The walkway felt like it had become narrower, though I knew it had not. My sense of edges had changed. An officer on the Manhattan side tried to hold a line by the end of the south path, where the walkway meets stairs and the green girders give way to concrete. He wore a helmet and a clear visor, and had that hunched posture of a person using gear as an extra layer of self. He shouted for orderly exit. 2 other officers, one with a rifle, held back a crowd that had lost the ability to obey verbs. The infected bled into that crowd like dye into water. Order dissolved where contact happened. I pointed to the outermost edge where the fence meets a maintenance beam. "We go high," I told Nora, because I could not see a way through the knot by the stairs. That beam was not meant to be walked by civilians in dress shoes, but it existed, and we had feet. She looked, judged the angles, lifted Ava under the armpits, and set her on the beam. She moved beside her with one hand on the chain link, one hand lightly on the girl's back. I followed close enough to catch without overbalancing all 3 of us if one of us slipped. Reuben brought up the rear and stayed half a body length down, ready to block anything that tried to stand where we were standing. On the roadway, a sedan burned itself out, and became a black shape that would sit there until a tow came that would never come. A delivery truck used its bumper to push a compact car sideways and cleared a lane enough for an ambulance whose driver thought speed was more important than impartial rules. The ambulance lurched forward and found the gap closed by people who cannot step aside, because stepping aside would mean stepping into a mouth. The siren barked. The driver cut it and used the horn. The horn failed at the same job. We moved our 3 human lengths at a time. Ava whispered numbers. Nora repeated them like a song. Ruben spoke once. When you get to the platform, jump down. Do not climb. Jump. I will follow. His voice was unbothered by the fact that there were 100 unknowns between that instruction and any safe ground. He gave a simple next step and waited for it to exist. An infected woman below us turned her head up as if she had heard a string pluck next to her ear. Her mouth opened and closed in a steady rhythm. Her fingers twitched like she was counting something private. She reached for the fence and touched it with the reverence of a person touching a relic. Then she slammed both palms and her forehead into it with a dull, hard sound. The fence answered with a shudder. Others nearby looked up. It takes only one to show the rest that up is an option. We reached a section where the beam widened enough to stop and breathe without asking permission from your legs. I glanced down at the river. A small boat moved hard against the current toward the base of the bridge. The pilot steered like a person who had driven this river for 20 years and forgot to be afraid by making too many small decisions to let fear find a solid chair. I wanted to wave. I did not. Distance is a kind of kindness. Last stretch, I said to Ava, because children deserve accurate hope. From here to the stairs. 10, 10, and done. She nodded with a seriousness that did not belong on a small face. Nora squeezed her shoulder. Ruben glanced back and measured the gap and the number of shapes trying to learn how to climb. He did some quiet math, then said, "Go now." We went. The beam narrowed again by a junction box. Ava slipped on dust and caught herself with a small gasp. Nora froze just long enough to become an obstacle, then forced herself forward and regained rhythm. I tucked the edge of my shoe to keep friction and prayed a wordless prayer to friction's God, who seldom gets offerings and deserves more. We reached the platform by the stairs where the walkway meets a concrete landing. Nora swung down and turned and caught Ava as she hopped. I dropped beside them and made space. Ruben turned to step down, and something caught his boot. Not a hand. A loose loop of fence bent outward by someone else's panic. He stumbled, righted himself, and then a surge hit from his left. Not infected. People. He slammed into the chain link, bounced, lost the iron for a half second, found it again. An infected man in a plaid shirt seized his sleeve with both hands and pulled without any plan beyond pull. Ruben's feet skidded. His eyes found mine. He did not ask for help with his face. He asked for us to move with his chin. "I have her," Nora said, pulling Ava back and ready to run for the foot of the stairs. I set my foot on the bottom rung and reached up with my left hand. Fingers stretched toward Ruben's wrist. For a moment, skin met skin, and I felt the oil of work on his forearm. He tried to lever out, and the man in plaid added a second pull, hips into it. The iron clanged. People pressed from behind, unaware of the lever their bodies had become. Ruben did the one thing a longshoreman or a warehouse man knows to do in a crush. He dropped straight down, knees loose, body like a sack for a heartbeat. The grip on his sleeve lost leverage. He popped up under their arms, rolled his shoulder, and cut sideways along the fence like a fish along a piling. He found the beam. He found his stance. He shot me a quick grin that looked tired and honest, then stepped down onto the platform with a thud. "Go," he said, the word a constant in a sentence that would not end until we were off steel. We took the stairs, 2 at a time for me, 1 and careful for Nora and Ava. The landing spit us into a runout that feeds the Manhattan side near 178th Street. The checkpoint had become something no longer called a checkpoint. The officers were now individuals making choices under a sky that had changed color because smoke does that to blue. A line of civilians pressed out past tape that did not matter anymore. The Walking Dead seeped through the edges, found corners to hold, then pushed from those corners. An officer lifted a bullhorn and yelled for everyone to slow down. The sound came out ragged, the bullhorn's battery dying, Another officer used his hands like paddles to guide people. He looked at me, saw one adult with one child and one more adult and one man with an iron, and pointed left toward a small gap between a police SUV and a concrete barrier. I nodded thanks because it felt important to put thank you into the air. We slipped through. On the far curb, a man in a lab coat with a hospital badge around his neck was talking too fast to a TV camera held by someone who could not find focus with his lens. The words I heard were neurological, incubation, atypical. The camera turned and recorded the anonymous backs of people running. The lab coat looked at his hands like they were responsible witnesses, and then followed his own advice to get off the street. We hit the end of the ramp, and the city opened with a blaze of sirens and smoke, and a view down Broadway that did not make sense with the calendar. A grocery had its shutters halfway down. People shoved carts inside without paying. A woman slapped a man who had put a case of water in his trunk and tried to take one back out of hers. A fire hydrant laid bright water across the street like a ribbon because someone had opened it to make a wall and found that water only does one job at a time. A helicopter climbed from the East River and turned west and then veered hard north, blades flashing. It did not look like the police birds I knew. It looked military, its belly darker, its lines less forgiving. It headed toward the Palisades, as if New Jersey had become a safe direction. Another helicopter followed at distance. The ferry terminal far downriver laughed a white wake into brown water and made speed for Hoboken. Ova's hand squeezed mine hard, small bones insisting on attention. I looked down and she pointed at a woman on the curb with a stroller. The woman was kneeling and speaking to a shape under a blanket. Nora tugged Ava away gently, like her arm was made of silk. Eyes up, with me. At the foot of the block, a police tape fluttered. A man in a deli doorway shouted numbers for bottled water like an auctioneer. A group of teenagers ran past with their faces turned inward, as if they were already telling the story of what they had done, and the telling felt safer than the doing. A delivery driver opened the back of his truck and distributed bread in random handfuls, a crow scattering seeds. The infected were in the side streets now. Not many, enough to prove trend. One stepped into the crosswalk and stopped dead as a car slid by 2 feet away. He did not flinch. He pivoted and found the densest spot of people with his eyes like water finding the lowest place. An officer raised a rifle and shouted to clear. The crowd did not clear. He fired once, high into a building cornice. The noise made space, temporary and thin. People obeyed the sound of it, not the instruction. Ava's water bottle slipped from her hand and rolled into the gutter. She made a small sound. I started to go for it. Nora shook her head once. "Leave it," she said, and her tone said she had just left many things behind forever in less than an hour. The sentence lodged in me like a key in a lock. We reached a point where the crowd split. One lane angled south toward the A train, where someone was yelling that the station was open. Another angled east toward the river, where rumors said ferries were taking anyone with a pulse. A third lane went into a tangle of parked cars and double-parked ambulances, where sirens wailed their last seconds. Rumor has a way of clutching at the shirt. You feel the tug and follow. I chose south, because underground sounded like walls, and walls sounded like a thing you could stand behind if you had to. Nora hesitated, looked toward the ferries because water means departure, then looked back at me because a known companion sometimes beats a distant promise. She nodded once. We turned south. Reuben swung the iron into his belt and kept one hand free for any small person who lost balance. Our line moved along a curb painted no parking. A delivery guy stopped his scooter and joined us, leaving the scooter running in the street because flipping a key takes time. You cannot justify when motion is currency. He had a delivery bag and a helmet with stickers. He took the helmet off and left it on the sidewalk after 3 steps because helmets make it hard to hear. The A train station stairs looked like salvation from 50 feet. From 10, they looked like a drain where everything goes whether it fits or not. People jammed. The stairwell echoed with instructions and denial. A transit worker at the top shouted that the turnstiles were open. A transit worker at the bottom shouted that the trains were not coming. Both sentences were true. We hesitated. Something in the air shifted. The crowd's noise dropped a register as if someone had turned a dial. I turned back toward the bridge out of reflex and saw it. The span was not a span anymore. It was a corridor of motion. The infected filled it not as a mass, but as a pattern, pouring into the space we had vacated. Hundreds, more than I could pass. From this distance they looked like ants on sugar, individual but part of a single hunger. The bridge had become a conveyor. It would empty, and then the city would receive the contents. "Back," Nora said, voice small but hard. She was not saying back to the bridge. She was saying back from the stairwell that had taken on the wrong density. I agreed. Reuben agreed without words. We turned east again toward the water. The crowd agitated like a tank of fish someone had tapped. The tap was the sight of us turning. The signal moved down the block. Motion changed direction for 100 people because 3 had shown a new way to go. We moved past a storefront window that reflected us. I looked wrong in that glass. I looked like a person who had mislaid a version of himself in traffic and was trying to walk in a borrowed body. Behind that reflection, shelves of cereal waited for decisions that would not be made in the old way. At the corner, a line of officers tried to swing a metal barricade into position, and failed, because weight is not only measured by the scale, it is measured by the number of hands available. Someone yelled for more hands. A handful came. The barricade shifted. Then the walking dead reached the far end of the block and the calculus changed. The officers dropped the barricade halfway through the turn and backed up, palms out, the way a person backs away from a dog, with a look that says, "Forgive me. I know you do not intend harm, but your teeth are wrong." Nora's grip on Ava tightened. She leaned into my shoulder and said in a voice that had forgotten how to shake, "If we get split, you take her. Get her to the water. I will find you." Instructions like that attached themselves to bones. I nodded because there was no correct sentence available. A van cut the corner too fast and clipped a hydrant. Water fountained against the light. It arced across the crosswalk and splashed a stop sign into a temporary mirror. Ava laughed once, a surprised, involuntary sound. The human response to a fountain on a warm day. She stopped when she saw Nora's face and took her cue. Childhood receded a step. We reached the edge of the block where the river air got stronger. Ferries downriver were still moving. A voice on a bullhorn half a mile away said numbers for loading. That sounded like hope pretending to be protocol. The infected encountered the fresh water spray from the hydrant and did not blink. They encountered a hot dog cart and knocked it sideways, steam and mustard scent riding up like memory. This was where the crowd became a storm. People surged toward the pier. Others surged away from something at the pier we could not see yet. Motion met motion. The line tore. I felt a tug on my backpack and spun, expecting a hand. It was not a hand. It was the zipper tab caught in someone's sleeve. I slipped free. In the half-second my attention dropped. The crowd opened like a camera iris and then closed. Nora and Ava were not at my side. I turned twice, fast. Turning fast on a street full of running feet makes balance a project. I shouted Nora's name. I shouted Ava's name. Both names vanished into the city's voice like pennies into a fountain. A man bumped me and said sorry, and looked like he had not said that word in a year but could still find it. I climbed the hood of a parked car for elevation. The metal sagged, and the alarm died on the third chirp. Faces spread beneath me like a field at harvest. I saw Reuben 10 yards left, head high, scanning like a dock foreman looking for a missing crate. He met my eyes and gestured with an open hand that asked, "Question." I mimed small and hair at shoulder length with my fingers and pointed east. He nodded once. He pushed into the flow. He was a big man, but not large enough to part what the day had become. A pocket of space opened. I jumped down and ran the edge of it, using parked cars as a wall to keep from being spun. A child cried for a father. A father shouted for a child. A siren phoned in another lie. An officer yelled to keep moving. An infected woman gripped a parking meter and rocked with emotion that felt borrowed from a different century. I found a glove. Pink. A water bottle with unicorns. A sticker that said, "Great job." None of those were the child I wanted to find. Ahead, the pier entrance boiled. Ferry workers in reflective vests yelled for order. The boat at the dock had the look of a thing at capacity. The captain on the second deck gestured to cast off. The lines were uncooperative because everything was uncooperative now. I pushed up a short concrete platform near a lamppost. Just 6 steps, chipped at the edges, gum blackened in the corners, but it felt like elevation, like I might finally get eyes above the chaos. From there, I could see a slice of the crowd as it thrashed and churned along the cross streets. The bridge was behind me, and ahead, the pier was somewhere just beyond the ferry depot, half hidden by smoke and a forest of shoulders and heads. My eyes scanned faces, colors, motions. In motion, every person starts to blur into the same frantic gait, same wide eyes, same pressed jawlines. Panic makes patterns. You think you'll recognize someone instantly, but when hundreds move like the same wave, it takes a second longer than it should to pick out the face you're desperate for. I caught the red flash of a hood. Not just red, maroon, a deeper color, part of a jacket I'd memorized without meaning to. There, on the far side of a parked police SUV that had been abandoned sideways across the lane, like someone stopped to help and never got back in. Nora was there. I knew it before my brain caught up to my eyes. She had Ava in front of her, both hands gripping the girl's jacket, guiding her like a swimmer slicing through surf. Her stance was low, knees slightly bent, her shoulder rotating as she pushed Ava ahead with slow, mechanical certainty. The same rhythm she had when we crossed the catwalk, only now it had to compete with strangers lunging past her on both sides. Then the current broke. A man tripped just 2 feet in front of them, a lanky guy in a dress shirt that had come untucked. He hit hard. A woman tried to help him up and got slammed into by 2 others who didn't even see her. 4 people collapsed into a heap. Someone screamed, not in pain, but in surprise, the way a person does when gravity wins before they were ready. I shoved down from the platform, almost twisted my ankle on the last step, and sprinted toward the SUV, weaving around an older man dragging a rolling suitcase, and 2 teenagers, who looked way too calm for what was happening. I kept my eyes locked on the spot where I had last seen them, Nora's dark hair, Ava's hood, and pushed through a row of people flowing the opposite direction. The SUV was just 10 feet away. I could see the roof rack. I reached the rear bumper and started to pivot around, when a uniformed arm shot out and pressed flat against my chest, stopping me cold. A police officer, maybe late 30s, not panicked, but not calm either. He looked exhausted, dust across his cheeks, sweat bleeding through his collar, sidearm drawn but pointed down. His hand didn't shove, just held. "Back," he said, not angry, just final. His voice was dry. "Back to the fence, no more through here." I pointed around him, past the SUV, to the direction Nora and Ava had gone. "My people are right there. I just need to..." I don't even remember the sentence I tried to finish. I must have said it a dozen different ways in a row. "It's just a kid. I saw them go through. Please." But the look in his eyes didn't change. He'd heard those exact words all morning, probably more times than I could imagine. He didn't argue. He didn't escalate. He just repeated the rule. "Back to the fence," he said again. Then he flicked his eyes towards something behind me, maybe a break forming in the crowd, and turned without waiting for a reply. I stepped back, not because I agreed, but because anything more would have turned me into a different version of myself, the kind that ignores lines and shoves past people who are just trying to hold what little order remains. There was still some illusion of the world working if I followed one rule, one step back, and I was still who I'd been that morning. I kept my eyes on the spot past the SUV. But they were gone. The gap had sealed. The spot where Nora had been steering Ava forward now looked like every other corner. Strangers clashing elbows. Old men trying to shield their faces from dust. Women clutching purses to their sides, as if money still meant anything. I scanned hard for maroon, for a girl's bouncing gait, for any thread I could follow. Nothing. The ferry horn blared again from beyond the smoke. That deep, vibrating sound, the kind that cuts through everything else. I turned toward it instinctively. The water lines had started moving. Lines went slack, dock hands waved, and the boat lurched away from the pier. People on the edge reached out with both hands. Some even tried to jump, but the ferry was already 3 feet out and gaining distance. One man in a sport coat sprinted down the gangway as it was being pulled up and launched himself off the lip. He missed. His body hit the side of the hull with a thud and slipped into the river like a dropped coat. Someone screamed. The ferry didn't stop. The boat kept moving, slowly at first, then with more confidence. It weaved away from the dock as another tried to edge in behind it, but the crowd was already mobbing the next gangway, and there was no rhythm to it anymore. I turned again, scanning for movement that made sense. Anything that looked like Nora's steady pull or Ava's darting frame. Still nothing. The noise began to change. It had been panic, yes, but localized. Dense pockets, shouted warnings, coughing. Now it was rising into something more uniform. A frequency shift. The crowd to the north had gone quiet in the way that animals go quiet before something snaps. I turned to look, eyes moving up along the curve of the bridge where it entered the city. It looked like the bridge was spilling people. Not just regular foot traffic or even a panicked flood. It was a flow, shoulder to shoulder, wrong posture, arms pumping not in escape but in pursuit. The infected had made it over. Hundreds of them, maybe more. A river of flesh pouring off the structure like someone had opened a gate upstream and let terror ride the current. They didn't scream. That was the worst part. No noise, no rallying cry. Just movement. Jittering. Uneven. Legs pumping too fast. Some weaving like their spines weren't right. From here they looked like smudges across the landscape, but there were no gaps in the line. No stumbles. No hesitation. Just hunger. Helicopters banked hard over the city, pulling east. One of them dipped low over the river, circled once, then accelerated away toward the New Jersey side. The others turned their noses toward the meadowlands, disappearing behind the haze of smoke that now smudged the skyline like thumbprints on glass. The realization hit me at once. The bridge was lost. It wasn't even a fight anymore. The infected weren't just breaking through. They owned it. Everyone still trying to cross was running into a meat grinder they didn't know existed yet. And somewhere between here and the bridge's mouth, Nora and Ava were in that crowd. I felt the weight of it land in my chest, like the moment when you miss a stair and your whole body jolts. But this wasn't a mistake that could be laughed off or corrected. This was a fracture. I had let them out of sight for 30 seconds. That's all it took. I moved without a plan. I cut back along the sidewalk toward the edge of the pier, scanning for the ferry lines again, pushing through a knot of people shouting about IDs and children and who got here first. A woman held a baby above her head, not in desperation, but to make sure no one trampled her. She wasn't moving. She just stood there like a flag, arms shaking, trying to hold her world above the flood. Near the barricades, another officer was being pulled in 3 directions at once. A man in a wheelchair shouted for someone to help his wife. He pointed behind him, but no one turned to look. A teen in a yellow jacket begged to get through, voice breaking. The officer barked instructions and waved his arms, but nobody was listening. The riverfront crowd had started to collapse in on itself, folding under the realization that the ferries were never going to be enough. Some pushed forward, others turned back, and the rest just stalled, trapped in place by indecision. That's when I knew the pier would fail next. The weight of the panic was shifting south, and once the infected reached the barricades, it would be over. I ran, not away, not toward, just across. I checked every gap, every face that turned sideways, every motion that resembled her gait. I saw a girl Ava's size clinging to a stranger's hand and nearly called out before realizing it wasn't her. Same coat, wrong shoes. More sirens screamed from the east. A convoy of black SUVs with government plates roared through an intersection without slowing, scatter-pushing pedestrians aside. A news van spun on the curb and parked half up the sidewalk, rear doors open, antenna up, camera already filming the wrong thing. Still nothing. Still no sign of them. I stopped near a bollard at the edge of the water and turned a full circle, my back to the Hudson, trying not to panic but feeling it in my teeth now. I spotted a woman in a maroon coat, but older, 35 maybe, hair tied back, not Nora. Her eyes locked with mine for half a second, and she looked like she understood what I had just done. Hoped against logic. I didn't speak. I just turned back north and stared at the bridge, still flowing, still feeding the city. A conveyor belt of doom, and no one could stop it. I couldn't tell where Nora had gone. I couldn't tell if Ava had made it through. I couldn't even be sure if they'd reached the ferry, or if they'd doubled back, or gotten swept toward the bridge again, or something worse. All I knew for sure was that the space where they had been now held someone else. And now, my problem is to hold out as long as possible. I just need to survive.